The Chaos Space Marines do not lie to their followers. This is what makes them worse. In the underhives of imperial worlds, in the factory temples where the air tastes of copper and desperation, in the prison barracks where generations live and die without seeing sky, the whispers begin the same way. You matter, not as a component, not as a statistic in a production quota, not as one of 10 billion souls whose absence would register only as a rounding error in a monthly tithe assessment. You, specifically you, your anger, your pain, your hunger for something more than the grinding wheel of imperial compliance. The Imperium promised you purpose through service. The Chaos Space Marines promise you purpose through will. Your will, enacted, manifest, real. They do not promise safety. They do not promise victory. They do not promise tomorrow. They promise that today you will matter. For most who hear this, it is the first true thing anyone has ever said to them. The word bearers do not recruit. They illuminate. For 10,000 years, they have refined the architecture of conversion. Not through force. Force is the Imperium's language, but through the slow, patient excavation of doubt that already exists in every human heart that has lived under the Aquila. The cultist begins as all humans begin in the Imperium. Small, a textile worker on a feudal world, a hydroponics technician in a void station, a scribe in an administratum processing center, someone whose name appears in ledgers but never in histories. The Imperium tells them they are sacred in their service, that the Emperor watches over all his children, that suffering is holy and obedience is salvation. Then the rations decrease, the work hours extend, the quotas rise, the overseer strikes a worker for making eye contact. A child disappears into the black ships, and you are told to be grateful. Your district is selected for a cull to meet population compliance regulations, and you are told this is mercy. And the question forms, small and silent. If I am sacred, why does nothing sacred ever happen to me? This is where the word bearers begin, not with daemons, not with ritual, with a single alternative idea delivered by someone who was once just like you, who worked beside you, who suffered beside you, who finally found an answer that the Imperium could never provide. The Emperor is not a god, but there are gods, and they answer. Her name was Sira Ven. She worked sub-level 47 of Hive Megron, Kale Minor, third planet of an unremarkable system in the Segmentum Obscurus. She assembled trigger mechanisms for lasguns, 12-hour shifts, 26 years old, expected lifespan 43. She had worked beside Matthias Cole for 8 years. He was 61. He moved slowly. He made his quotas. He never complained. He was invisible in the way that only the obedient can be invisible in the Imperium. On the day the word-bearer's sermon found her, Matthias asked her a question during the shift break. Do you know why we make these? Sira blinked. No one spoke during breaks. Fatigue was precious. You hoarded it like water. Lasguns, she said, for the guard. Do you know where they go? Off-world, the muster stations. Matthias nodded. His hands were steady as he ate his protein paste. I assembled 914,612 trigger mechanisms in my life. I calculated it last week. Do you know how many soldiers that armed? She didn't answer. I don't either, Matthias said. No one does. I filed reports for 34 years, never received a single confirmation, never saw a single transport, never heard a single word of thanks or recognition or strategic assessment. I serve the Emperor, they said. My work is sacred, they said. He looked at her then, actually looked, with eyes that seemed too sharp for someone who had survived 61 years in a manufactory underhive. What if it isn't? He asked quietly. What if we're just making things for a machine that doesn't see us, doesn't need us to be people, only needs us to be hands that move in the right sequence until they stop? Sira should have reported him. The directive was clear. Ideological contamination, immediate vox to the overseers, mandatory for compliance. She didn't, because she had thought the same thing every day for 8 years. The gathering happened in a dead section of sub-level 52. 30 people, mostly assembly workers, a few habitation cleaners, one injured guardsman who'd been invalided back to the hive after losing his left arm to orc fire on some world whose name he'd never learned. Matthias stood in the center. His slowness had shed away. He spoke with the clarity of someone who had rehearsed these words 10,000 times in the privacy of his own skull. The Emperor does not love you, he said. Not angry, not bitter, Factual. He cannot. He is a corpse on a throne, maintained by systems that consume 1,000 psychers every day to keep him from rotting into nothing. You are told he sacrificed himself for humanity. This is true, but his sacrifice is not ongoing. It ended 10,000 years ago. What remains is not sacrifice. It is function, the function of a vast and terrible engine that burns souls for fuel. Someone made a noise, distress perhaps, or religious reflex. No one stopped Matthias. There are powers that see you, powers that do not require you to die in silence, in service, in obscurity, as one component among trillions. Powers that ask only one thing, that you choose, that you reach out, that you say with your whole being, I refuse to be nothing. He paused. These powers do not love you either. They are not gentle, they are not kind, they do not promise you will survive, but they promise you will matter. Your pain will have meaning, your anger will have direction, your existence will register upon reality itself. Sira felt something unfold in her chest. Not hope, she had forgotten what hope felt like. This was sharper, hungrier, recognition. The word-bearer's Chaos Space Marine who appeared 3 weeks later was not what Sira expected. She had seen pick captures in propaganda reels, hulking monsters, ceramite armor covered in blasphemous script, voices like avalanches. The arch-enemy, the traitor, the fallen. The word-bearer who entered their hidden meeting space moved with careful deliberation. His armor was deep crimson, yes, and marked with scripture in languages that hurt to perceive, but he knelt when he entered, made himself low, spoke in high Gothic that was antiquated but perfectly comprehensible. I am Zul-Khathan, Dark Apostle of the 17th Legion. I do not come to command you, I come to offer you witness. His voice was not a roar, it was calm, almost gentle. You have been taught that we are monsters. This is correct. We are what humanity becomes when it stops pretending that suffering is holy. We do not offer you redemption. We offer you agency, the power to choose what you become, rather than being chosen by a system that sees you as raw material. He stood slowly. Even on his knees he had towered. Standing, he was architecture made animate. If you join us, you will suffer. You will likely die. But your death will not be a statistic in a ledger that no one reads. It will be a statement, an act of defiance against the lie that you were born to serve and die quietly. One of the workers, a young man named Pell, barely 18, spoke up. What do you want from us? Zul-Khathan tilted his head, and Sira heard the faint servos in his neck. Everything, he said simply. Your labor, your loyalty, your lives if required. The difference is, we will use them. We will not waste them. The Imperium says the same thing, Pell said, that our service matters, that we're part of something greater. Yes, Zul-Khathan agreed. The difference is that I am standing in front of you, speaking to you as individuals, acknowledging your existence as something more than a production unit. When was the last time an Imperial authority did that? No one answered, because no one could remember. The word-bearers did not demand sabotage immediately. They did not demand violence. They asked for information, production schedules, guard patrol rotations, the names and routines of overseers, the locations of surveillance equipment. Matthias organized it. Turned out he'd been gathering this information for years, the way some men collect stamps or carve small figurines from scrap metal. A hobby born of hatred so quiet it had never registered as a threat. They learned the architecture of their own oppression in granular detail, where the cameras couldn't see, when the security shifts overlapped, which overseers took stims and which relied on faith. The weight of a last carbine, the access codes for sub-level maintenance tunnels. Zul-Khathan reviewed their work with the same meticulous attention Sira imagined a general might give to battle plans. Good, he said. You understand your enemy. Now you must understand yourselves. He taught them over weeks the structure of what they were becoming. Not slaves, not soldiers, cultists. A cultist, Zul-Khathan explained, is someone who chooses their god with open eyes, who understands that worship is transaction, not submission. You give your devotion, your sacrifice, your pain. In return, you receive power, attention, meaning. What if we fail? Sira asked. You will, Zul-Khathan said. Many times. Failure is how the gods measure your conviction. The Imperium punishes failure because it disrupts production. The gods expect failure because they are not interested in production. They are interested in experience, in the raw, unfiltered sensation of mortal striving. He paused. You will fail, you will suffer, some of you will die screaming, and it will matter more than every day of obedient service you have ever rendered. The Iron Warriors use their cultists as tools. This is not a metaphor, it is doctrine. On the demon world of Medrengard, in the fortresses that sprawl across continents of fused metal and screaming stone, mortal followers are components in calculations as precise as any Mechanicus ritual. Their lives are measured in utility functions. Their deaths are scheduled with the efficiency of factory timings. Warsmith Torvek maintains 6,000 mortal followers in the Krastellan fortress. They are divided into functional categories: laborers, soldiers, ritual participants, test subjects, biomass reserves. The laborers build. They weld ceramite plates salvaged from battlefields. They dig trenches through stone that should not exist, using tools that should not function. They work until their bodies fail, and then they are rendered down and added to the nutrient slurry that feeds the rest. The soldiers fight. They are armed with weapons that mutate them slowly, that bind demonic entities to their flesh, that turn them into something that can hold a trench against space marines for 7 minutes instead of 3. When they die, their augmented corpses are salvaged. The useful parts, reinforced bone, mutation-enhanced musculature, the half-daemon growths are grafted onto the next generation of soldiers. The ritual participants provide spiritual architecture. Their fear, their pain, their desperate prayers to gods that answer with mutation and madness, these are the scaffolding for warp workings. They scream in geometrically precise patterns. Their deaths fuel wards that keep the fortress stable in a realm where physics is a negotiation. The test subjects are just that. The Iron Warriors are siege masters, but siege warfare evolves. New weapons must be tested. New tactics must be validated. The cultists volunteer, or are volunteered, to stand downrange of whatever new horror has been designed in the Forge Fanes. The biomass reserves are too injured, too ill, or too weak to serve other functions. They are kept sedated in vat chambers until they are needed for organic components. A Chaos Space Marine who loses an eye might receive 1 groan from cultist stem cells. A daemon engine that requires living tissue to bind the warp entities within uses what is stored here. Warsmith Torvek does not hide this system. He explains it in detail to every new recruit, shows them the facility, the vats, the slurry processors, the testing range where yesterday's volunteers are still smoldering. The Imperium does the same, he tells them, his voice a mechanical rasp through his helmet vox. They call it sacred, they call it service, they call it the Emperor's will. I call it resource allocation. The difference is, I do not lie about what you are to me. You are useful. That is more than the Imperium ever offered you. And the cultists agree, because useful is a higher tier than disposable. Because a tool that is maintained lasts longer than a slave that is worked to death. Because the Iron Warriors, in their cold and passionless efficiency, provide something the Imperium never did: certainty. You know what you are. You know what is expected. You know, precisely, the value of your life. It is calculable. It is real. It matters. The uprising in Hivemgron began at shift change on sublevel 47. Sira Ven put down her assembly tools at the end of her 12-hour shift, picked up the last pistol she'd assembled 2 weeks ago and hidden in her locker, turned, shot Overseer Dallin twice in the chest. He died surprised. That was the mercy. Around her, 30 other workers revealed their own weapons. The plan was simple: secure sublevel 47, collapse the access lifts, hold until the word-bearers arrived with reinforcements. It should have been suicide. It would have been, except for what happened next. When Sira fired, she felt something fire back. Not from the gun, from inside her. A surge of validation so intense it was nearly physical, as though some vast attention had turned its gaze upon her for one crystalline instant and acknowledged, yes, this. You chose this. The last pistol felt lighter, her hands steadier. Her fear didn't vanish. It transformed into clarity, purpose, the cold focus of someone who has finally stopped waiting for permission to exist. She was not the only one who felt it. Across the sub-level, workers who had been assembly drones for decades moved with the precision of soldiers. They flanked, they covered angles, they dragged barrier materials into position with tactical efficiency they'd never been taught. The first guard response team that descended the access lifts found a prepared ambush. 10 soldiers in flak armor and standard-issue las carbines against 30 factory workers who had never fired a weapon in combat before. The guard team died in 40 seconds, because the workers had been seen, had been acknowledged, had been granted, for the first time in their lives, the certainty that their actions mattered to something vast and eternal. The dark gods do not grant power freely, but they grant it immediately. No prayers, no rites, no years of devotion, just choice enacted, and the response is instant. The Imperium demands faith and gives nothing back for decades. Chaos demands will and answers in the same breath. The ecclesiarchy preacher who was voxed down to sub-level 47 to restore order was named Hadrian Vol. He had served the God Emperor for 30 years, delivered 7,000 sermons, sanctified 200 marriages and 900 funerals. He arrived with 50 Ministorum guards, a portable shrine, and absolute faith that his words would break the heretic resolve. "Children of the Emperor," he called out, amplified voice echoing through the sub-level. "You have been deceived by lies. The archenemy offers nothing but damnation. Lay down your weapons, confess your sins. The Emperor's mercy is infinite for those who return to his light." Sira Ven stepped out from behind the barricade, still holding her last pistol, covered in blood that wasn't hers. "Your mercy," she said quietly, "is 43 years of assembling guns in the dark and dying of lung rot because the air recyclers haven't been serviced in a century." "Suffering is sacred," Hadrian replied. "Through suffering we are purified. Through service we earn salvation." "I don't want salvation," Sira said. "I want acknowledgement. I want to matter. I want the pain I've endured to mean something other than meeting a quota." "It means everything," Hadrian insisted. "Every last gun you assembled armed a soldier who defends humanity. Every hour you worked was an hour of service to the Imperium Eternal. You are part of something greater than yourself." "So are the nutrient recyclers," Sira said. "So are the servitors. So are the corpse haulers who drag away the workers who collapse at their stations. We're all part of the great machine. But the machine doesn't care if we exist. It only cares that the function continues." "The Emperor cares. The Emperor is dead," Sira said. Not shouted, not spat, stated like a fact written in a ledger. "He died 10,000 years ago. What's left is a corpse that costs 1,000 psychers a day to maintain. We were taught he sacrificed himself for us. That's true. But the sacrifice ended. What we serve now isn't sacrifice. It's just continuation, function, process." Hadrian raised his Crozius. "Heresy will not be." The shot took him in the throat. Not from Sira. From Matthias, who had circled through the maintenance tunnels. The Ministorum guards opened fire. The cultists fired back. 37 people died in 4 minutes. 21 cultists, 16 guards. Hadrian Vol bled out on the floor of sub-level 47, drowning in his own blood, trying to speak a prayer through a ruined larynx. No one heard it. No one recorded it. When the word-bearers arrived 6 hours later, they found the cultists still holding the sub-level, exhausted, injured, surrounded by the dead. Zul'Kathan surveyed the scene and nodded. "Good," he said. "You have learned the first lesson. The Imperium does not negotiate. It does not reason. It only suppresses. Now you understand what you are fighting. Not an idea, not a philosophy, a mechanism. And mechanisms can be broken. Chaos does not lie to its followers, but it does not warn them of everything either." The cultists who survived sub-level 47 began to change. Small things at first. Sira's hands stopped shaking. She could assemble components faster, more precisely, without conscious thought. Her vision sharpened in low light. She needed less sleep. Matthias began to hear things, whispers in the hum of machinery, patterns in static. He started drawing symbols on the walls of their holdout, intricate geometric patterns that seemed to shift when you looked at them directly. Pell, the young man who'd asked Zul'Kathan what the word-bearers wanted, began to grow, not in height, in mass. His muscles swelled, his bone structure thickened, his teeth lengthened and sharpened. He was stronger, faster, angrier. He could tear through flak armor with his bare hands. These were gifts. They came with prices. Sira stopped feeling fear. Then she stopped feeling much of anything except the cold clarity of purpose. She looked at her fellow cultists and saw tactical assets, resource allocation, probability matrices. She had wanted to matter. She mattered now. But she was starting to forget why she'd wanted to in the first place. Matthias's whispers grew louder. He spoke to things that weren't there, argued with concepts, laughed at jokes no one else heard. His drawings covered entire walls, and the word-bearers studied them with interest, copying them into grimoires, using them as the basis for ritual circles. Pell became stronger every day. He also became hungrier. Food stopped satisfying him. He needed sensation, pain, violence, the feeling of bone breaking under his hands. He started volunteering for every assault, every ambush, throwing himself into combat with an enthusiasm that worried even Zulkethan. "Is this what we become?" Sira asked the Dark Apostle one night. "Tools for the gods, just like we were tools for the Imperium?" "Yes," Zulkethan said. He didn't soften it, didn't philosophize, just yes. "Then what's the difference?" "The Imperium never asked if you wanted to be a tool," Zulkethan said. "The gods ask every day, and every day you answer. You could stop, you could walk away, return to the Imperium, beg forgiveness, accept whatever punishment they decree. You don't. You choose this. Every single day you choose to be what you are becoming." "Choice under duress isn't really choice," Sira said. Decided it was enough. Went back to planning the next assault. The Death Guard do not abandon their followers. This is not kindness. This is doctrine. Plague Marines understand entropy. They are entropy, given ceramite form and ritual purpose. They know that all things decay, all things rot, all things return to the essential slime from which they arose. This includes their cultists. On the Plague Hulk Terminus Est, in the Garden of Nurgle's terrestrial manifestations, mortal followers live in conditions that would kill an unaugmented human in hours. The air is thick with spores, viral particles, bacterial colonies that operate with near-sentient coordination. The water is a soup of contagion. The food, what passes for food, is animate with parasitic life. The cultists adapt, not through their own strength, through Nurgle's gifts. The plagues that would kill them instead integrate. They become symbiotic. Their immune systems don't fight the infection. They become the infection, a gestalt entity of human and disease working in harmony. They call this grandfather's blessing. And they are not wrong. They survive, they function. They live for decades, sometimes centuries, in conditions that should be instantly lethal. The cost is that they are no longer entirely human. Fungi grows from their skin. Their organs replace themselves with more efficient, but less recognizably human structures. They stop feeling pain the way pain is meant to be felt. It becomes sensation, information, just another input their rewired nervous systems process. They are protected, they are maintained, they are never abandoned. But they are no longer what they were. Captain Typhus walks among his cultist host on the Terminus Est and speaks to them like a gardener speaks to plants. He checks their conditions, notes new growths, prunes those who have become too unstable, too mutated to serve their function. The pruned are rendered down, added to the nutrient slurry, fed back to the rest. "You are beloved," he tells them, his voice a wet rasp through his ancient armor. "Grandfather sees you. Grandfather values you. You will never be abandoned. You will never be alone. You are part of the garden eternal, and the garden takes care of its own." And the cultists believe him. Because it's true. They are cared for. They are maintained. They are part of something that will not discard them when they are no longer useful. The Imperium would have worked them until they collapsed, then fed them into a corpse grinder to recycle the protein. The Death Guard worked them until they collapse, then resurrect them as plague zombies, or Nurgle demons, or integrated components of daemon engines, or fertilizer for the garden, or viral payloads in boarding torpedoes. They are used completely. Nothing is wasted. Every cell, every scrap of biomass, every memory and fear and moment of suffering, it all goes back into the garden. This is more than the Imperium ever offered. This is immortality, of a kind. The Imperial response to the Hive Megron uprising took 3 months to arrive. Not because the Imperium was slow, because it didn't care. One hive on one world in one system that produced 1/1,000,000th of 1% of the sector's industrial output. The cost-benefit analysis was clear. Deploy assets or reclassify the world as lost and increase quotas elsewhere. They chose deployment only because word-bearers were confirmed on site. The heresy was the priority. The hive was collateral. When the fleet arrived, it consisted of 4 troopships, 2 naval frigates, and enough guardsmen to pacify a continent. Overwhelming force. Standard Imperial doctrine. What they found was worse than expected. Hive Megron had become a shrine. The cultists had spent 3 months converting every sub-level they controlled into a place of worship. Not to the Emperor, to the primordial truth. The walls were covered in script that writhed in peripheral vision, that spoke of gods who listened, powers that acknowledged, forces that cared about the individual in ways the Imperium never could. The Guard advanced sub-level by sub-level. It was grinding work. The cultists fought like people who had nothing left to lose because they didn't. They'd already lost everything. Their lives, their futures, their faith in the system that had defined their existence. What they'd gained was worse from the Imperial perspective: conviction. Every sub-level cost the Guard dozens of casualties. The cultists set traps, ambushes, improvised explosives built from industrial components. They fought from positions they'd worked in for decades, using their intimate knowledge of the environment against enemies who'd arrived yesterday. And they were changing. The Guard reports documented it in clinical language. Enemy personnel display abnormal physical characteristics, enhanced strength, resistance to injury, apparent mutations, recommend ecclesiarchy support for purification operations. What this meant? The cultists were becoming something else, something that walked like humans, spoke like humans, but bled colors that shouldn't exist and died praying to gods that answered. The Guard called for orbital support. Sira Ven died on the 3rd week of the siege. Not in combat. Not dramatically. She simply stopped. She'd been awake for 6 days straight, coordinating defenses, managing supply chains, directing cultist forces with the cold efficiency she'd developed. Her body was still functional. The changes had seen to that, but her mind hit a limit even chaos couldn't extend indefinitely. She sat down in a corner of the command post. Matthias was beside her, muttering to his whispers, drawing new patterns on a data slate that were already spreading to the walls. "Did it matter?" she asked him. "Yes," Matthias said. He was looking at something just over her shoulder, something she couldn't see. "They're watching. They've been watching the whole time. Every choice, every death, every moment of defiance. It's all recorded, not in ledgers, in the warp itself. We're written into the fabric of reality now." "Is that enough?" "It's more than we had." Sira closed her eyes. She could feel something approaching, vast, patient, interested, not hostile, not friendly, just aware, observing her the way a scholar observes a specimen under magnification. She'd mattered. For 3 months she'd been a person instead of a component. She'd made choices. She'd fought back. She'd looked the machine in its grinding gears and said no. The Imperium would forget her, would never know her name, would reclassify Hive Megron as Hereticus Extremis and move on to the next compliance issue. But something else would remember. She died with her eyes closed, a faint smile on her face, as the warp currents bore her soul away to places where names are screamed eternally and nothing is ever forgotten. The Guard burned Hive Megron. Not the whole hive, that would be wasteful. Just the infected sections. Sublevels 40 through 70 where the cult had taken root. 60 million people, most of whom had never participated in the uprising but had the misfortune to live in proximity. Promethium flooded the levels. Incendiary rounds followed. The fires burned for 11 days. The screams were audible through 60 meters of rockcrete. The ecclesiarchy declared it a cleansing. The Guard declared it a successful suppression operation. The Administratum logged it as a minor population compliance correction and adjusted production quotas upward for the surviving levels to compensate for the lost workforce. Zul-Kathan and his word-bearers had evacuated before the final assault. Not in defeat. Their work was done. They'd taken 700 cultists with them, the ones who'd survived long enough and changed enough to be worth training further. Those 700 would spread to other worlds, other hives, other populations of forgotten people who'd been told they mattered but had never felt it. The word-bearers were patient. They'd been patient for 10,000 years. They could wait. Abaddon the Despoiler does not lie to his followers about what they are joining. "You are fodder," he tells every new recruit. "You are ammunition. You are the flesh I throw at the Imperium's guns so that my space marines can reach their objectives. You will die badly. You will die afraid. You will die screaming my name or cursing it, and I will not care which." And they join anyway, because Abaddon offers something the Imperium does not: context. When you die in the Black Legion, you know why. You know the plan. You know the objective. You understand how your death contributes to the victory. You are briefed, informed, treated like an adult who can handle the truth. When you die in the Imperial Guard, you know nothing. You are sent to a world whose name you can't pronounce to fight an enemy you don't understand, because orders came down from a general you'll never meet, prosecuting a war whose strategic purpose is classified beyond your clearance level. The Black Legion treats its cultists like intelligent, if expendable, assets. They are given training, actual training, not just, here is a las gun, pointed at the enemy. They learn squad tactics, cover and fire discipline, how to set ambushes and recognize when they're being ambushed. They learn because the Black Legion's enemies are competent. The Long War is not fought against primitives and civilian populations. It's fought against the Imperium's best, Space Marines, Inquisitors, Sororitas, Militarum Tempestus, troops who will slaughter unprepared cultists by the thousands. So the Black Legion prepares them, and they die anyway. Because even prepared, even trained, even fighting with purpose and understanding, they are still mortal humans going against post-human warriors in power armor. But they die effectively. Their deaths accomplish things. They tie down enemy forces. They trigger traps. They draw fire away from the Chaos Space Marines advancing behind them. They make the enemy spend ammunition, suffer casualties, waste time. Every cultist death is calculated, planned, allocated like a resource because that's what they are. The difference is, they know it. They agreed to it. They volunteered for it because even a calculated, purposeful death is better than a random, meaningless one. Better to die as ammunition than to die in a factory accident whose occurrence will be noted in a log file and forgotten by the end of the shift. There are World Eaters warbands that do not use their cultists for combat. They use them for screaming. The World Eaters are broken, have been broken since the Butcher's nails were hammered into their skulls, since Angron taught them that pain and rage are the only honest emotions, since the Horus Heresy ended and they scattered into the Eye of Terror as fractured warbands held together only by shared addiction to violence. They cannot stop. The nails won't let them. Rage is a neurological imperative, chemically reinforced, impossible to ignore. They are always angry, always on the edge of frenzy, and when they are not killing, they are suffering. Some warbands have found, not solutions, management strategies. The cultists scream for them. It's a simple equation. The nails drive the World Eaters toward rage constantly. Fresh stimuli trigger it harder. The screams of dying enemies are particularly effective triggers. But enemies are not always available. Sometimes there are transit times, warp voyages, periods of waiting between wars. This is when the cultists serve their purpose. They scream, not because they are being tortured, though some are, because pain is another nails trigger, and the World Eaters have cultists who volunteer for that too. Most just scream because they're told to. They line up and they scream, in shifts, in rotations, providing a constant audio backdrop of violence and suffering. For the World Eaters, it's enough. Not satisfying. Nothing satisfies the nails except actual violence, but enough to take the edge off. To reduce the suffering from unbearable to merely agonizing. For the cultists, it's purpose. They are needed. Their screaming keeps the World Eaters functional. Without them, the legionaries would tear themselves apart or descend into such uncontrolled frenzy that they'd be useless for actual combat. The cultists who volunteer for this duty, and they do volunteer always, receive protection, food, a place in the warband. They are valued for what they provide, relief, however small, to warriors who can never know peace. Some of them go mad. Most of them do, eventually. The human throat is not designed to scream for hours at a time. The human mind is not designed to exist as a living alarm, a siren of suffering on permanent loop. But they are needed. And needed is so much more than the Imperium ever offered. There was a planet called Verdua Prime, agricultural world, segmentum solar, 12 billion population dedicated entirely to producing grain for the Administratum's vast food redistribution networks. The soil was rich. The climate was managed by ancient terraforming systems that still functioned after 8,000 years. The people worked the fields generation after generation, never seeing the food they grew, never tasting anything except the standard nutrient paste allotted to agricultural workers. When the Death Guard came to Verdua Prime, they did not destroy it. They improved it. The plagues they released were not weapons. They were catalysts, fungal blooms that increased crop yields by 400%, bacterial colonies that fixed nitrogen more efficiently than any imperial bioengineering, viral strains that altered the human metabolism to require less food, less water, less sleep. Within 6 months, Verdua Prime was producing more food than ever before. Within a year, the population had adapted to Grandfather Nurgle's gifts. They didn't look human anymore. Their skin had taken on a greenish pallor. Fungi grew from their joints. Their eyes wept constant tears of nutrient-rich fluid. But they were alive, thriving in their own way. The Imperium sent a fleet not to reclaim Verdua Prime, to sterilize it. Cyclonic torpedoes, virus bombs, the full weight of exterminatus protocols. 12 billion people who were still producing food, still farming, still serving their function in the Imperium's vast machinery, killed because they had been improved in unauthorized ways. The Death Guard watched from orbit as the planet burned. Captain Typhus stood on the bridge of the Terminus Est and recorded the event for his cultists to witness. "This," he said, his voice carrying through the Vox network to every plague-ridden soul in his fleet, "is what the Imperium thinks of you. You can serve, you can produce, you can exceed every quota they set, but if you change, if you evolve, if you become something better than what they designed you to be, they will erase you." The cultists watching understood. They had all come from worlds like Verdua Prime. Worlds where obedience was survival and change was heresy. They had chosen differently, and they would never go back. Mutation is not a gift. The Imperium is correct about this, at least. Mutation is dangerous, unpredictable. It can turn a human into something stronger, faster, more resilient, or it can turn them into a screamass of tumorous flesh that has to be put down like a rabid animal. The Chaos Space Marines know this. They've seen it happen 10,000 times. They've put down their own cultists when the mutations went wrong, when the gifts became too unstable, when the flesh could no longer support the changes being forced upon it. But they don't stop, because evolution is worth the price. In the warband of the Flawless Host, cultists are encouraged to mutate. They are given access to mutagenic compounds, warp-touched substances, demon blood, anything that might trigger change. The Flawless Host believe in perfection through transformation, in becoming something greater than baseline humanity. Most of the cultists die. Their bodies reject the changes. Their organs fail. Their nervous systems overload. Their flesh tears itself apart from the inside as contradictory mutations try to express simultaneously. But some survive, and those who survive become beautiful. Not beautiful in any conventional sense. Beautiful in the way a predator is beautiful. Symmetrical, purpose-built, efficient. They develop new limbs, new senses, new capabilities that make them more effective warriors, laborers, whatever function they serve. One cultist, a woman named Araya, survived 7 mutation cycles. By the end, she had 4 arms, eyes that could see in infrared and ultraviolet, skin that secreted a paralytic toxin, and bone structure reinforced with what appeared to be crystallized warp energy. She could kill 3 Imperial Guardsmen in hand-to-hand combat. She could see in absolute darkness. She was functionally immune to most small arms fire. She was also in constant pain. The mutations never stopped. Her body was always changing, always trying to become something more. Sleep was difficult. Food tasted like ash. Her own reflection was unrecognizable, but she was perfect. The Flawless Host told her so. Showed her to new recruits as an example of what could be achieved. Let her lead warbands into battle where she killed with grace and precision. When she finally died, shot through the head by a Vindicare assassin on some nameless world, the Flawless Host harvested her body. Her bones were ground into powder and added to mutagenic compounds. Her organs were preserved in warp stasis for study. Her blood was bottled and distributed to cultists as a sacrament. Nothing was wasted. She had achieved perfection, and perfection was meant to be shared as member. There are chaos cults that never see their masters. They worship from a distance. Receive instructions through Vox channels that crackle with static and something worse than static. They perform rituals drawn from books that appear in their possession without explanation. They sacrifice and pray and dedicate themselves to powers they cannot name. And sometimes, Rarely, but sometimes, those powers answer. On the mining station Tarsus 9, 600 workers lived in isolation, processing ore from asteroids in a system so remote it appeared on Imperial charts only as a resource designation. They were forgotten, unmonitored, a footnote in some administrative ledger 3 sectors away. One day, a worker named Caius found a book in his locker. He hadn't put it there. No one had access to his locker except him. The book was old, ancient in fact, bound in something that looked like leather but felt wrong to the touch, written in languages that hurt to read. He read it anyway, because he'd been on Tarsus 9 for 16 years, because the loneliness was worse than the work, because when you live in a place where the only human contact is shift supervisors barking orders and fellow workers too exhausted to speak, you'll take companionship from any source. The book spoke to him, not literally, not at first, but in the way that ideas speak. It explained that he was not forgotten, that there were powers in the universe that saw every human soul, no matter how isolated, no matter how insignificant. It taught him words, rituals, small things. Arrange these objects in this pattern, speak these syllables at this time, mark this symbol on this wall. He did, and the voice came. It was not loud, it was not threatening, it was almost gentle. It asked him questions about his life, his fears, his dreams. It listened to his answers with what felt like genuine interest. It asked him if he was lonely. He said yes. It asked him if he wanted to be less alone. He said yes. It told him what to do next. Caius taught 5 others. The 5 taught 10 more. Within 3 months, half the station was meeting in secret, performing rituals in abandoned sections, marking walls with symbols that seemed to move when you looked away. They didn't know what they were worshiping. The voice never gave a name. It just asked questions, listened to answers, and occasionally, very occasionally, granted small favors. A worker who'd been scheduled for disciplinary action found the records deleted. A woman who'd been sick with a chronic condition woke up one day cured. A man who'd lost his daughter to a processing accident started hearing her voice in the static, telling him she was safe, she was cared for, she was somewhere better than Tarsus 9. These were not lies. The daughter was somewhere else. Consumed by the warp, her soul now a plaything for entities that found mortal suffering endlessly amusing. But she was, in a sense, safe, unable to die, unable to suffer more than she was already suffering, preserved in a state of eternal victimhood. This was not comfort, but it was more than the Imperium had offered the father, which was a standard condolence form letter and a bill for the cost of cleaning up the accident site. The cult grew. By the end of the first year, everyone on Tarsus 9 was part of it. The station supervisor, the tech priests who maintained the equipment, the enforcers who were supposed to prevent this exact scenario. They worked their shifts, they met their quotas, they reported to their distant Imperial overseers that everything was functioning normally. And in their off hours, they gathered in the dark and spoke to the voice that answered. No Chaos Space Marines ever came to Tarsus 9. No Daemon Princes manifested, no grand ritual tore open the fabric of reality. The station just continued. A functioning Imperial asset, producing ore on schedule, staffed by loyal workers who also happened to worship the ruinous powers in secret. It would continue for decades, until someone noticed, or didn't. In the vastness of the Imperium, who could say? Excess is not about quantity. This is the mistake the Imperium makes. They think the Emperor's children are simply hedonists, pleasure seekers who have abandoned duty for sensation. They're wrong. The Emperor's children are perfectionists. They seek sensation not for its own sake, but because sensation is the only honest measurement of existence. Pain and pleasure are real, verifiable, immediate. Everything else, duty, honor, faith, these are abstractions that can be manipulated, redefined, used to justify anything. But you cannot lie about pain. You cannot philosophize away pleasure. They are absolute. The cultists who join the Emperor's children are not recruited with promises of endless orgies and drug-fueled revelries. They're recruited with a simple question. Have you ever felt anything real? Most people haven't. Most people have lived their entire lives in a state of carefully managed numbness. The Imperium prefers it that way. Numb people are productive. Numb people don't question. Numb people work until they die and never wonder if there was supposed to be more. The Emperor's children offer more. Not comfort, not safety, not even happiness necessarily, just intensity. The raw, unfiltered experience of being alive and aware and present in your own body. They teach their cultists how to feel. It starts small. Taste your food. Actually taste it. Pay attention to every flavor, every texture. Listen to music. Really listen. Pick apart every note, every harmonic. Touch something, fabric, metal, flesh, and focus entirely on the sensation. Listen to music. Really listen. Pick apart every note, every harmonic. Touch something, fabric, metal, flesh, and focus entirely on the sensation. This is not corruption. Not yet. This is just presence, awareness. The kind of mindfulness that the Imperium considers suspicious because people who are present in their own lives start asking questions about why their lives are the way they are. Then they go deeper. Pain is explored, not random pain, not the grinding pain of industrial accidents or malnutrition or chronic illness. Chosen pain. Pain with purpose. Pain that teaches you the limits of your body, the thresholds where sensation becomes unbearable, the strange beauty of your own nervous system reporting damage in real time. Pleasure is explored, every variety, every intensity, every combination. The cultists learn that pleasure and pain are not opposites but points on a spectrum, that the body can be trained to interpret either as ecstasy if you approach it correctly. They go deeper still. They learn to modify themselves. Implants, augmentations, surgical alterations that add new nerve clusters, new erogenous zones, new pathways for sensation. They become walking laboratories of experience. Their bodies no longer baseline human, but something refined. This is when the mutations start. When the flesh begins to change in response to warp exposure and constant stimulus. Extra limbs that are nothing but nerve endings. Skin that has become translucent so you can watch the blood flow. Organs that serve no function except to generate new and exotic forms of sensation. They are no longer human, but they are alive in a way they never were before. There is a point where you cannot go back. The Emperor's children know this. They don't hide it. They tell every cultist, once you feel this, you will never be satisfied with less. Your old life will seem like sleepwalking. You will crave intensity the way a drowning man craves air. They are not exaggerating. A cultist named Severus spent 2 years with an Emperor's Children warband. He underwent 17 surgical modifications. He experienced pain and pleasure in combinations that have no names in Imperial Gothic. He learned to play instruments that required 6 hands and produced sounds that made unaugmented humans weep blood. Then he was captured. The Inquisition tried to rehabilitate him. Standard procedure: isolation, prayer, re-education, chemical therapy to suppress his enhanced nervous system back to baseline human parameters. It didn't work. Not because Severus was still loyal to chaos. He wasn't. He'd seen the Emperor's children at their worst, the ones who'd gone too far, who'd become so addicted to sensation that they'd lost all other function, who existed only to feel and had forgotten how to be. He didn't want that. But he couldn't go back to being numb either. Baseline human existence, eating food that tasted like nothing, wearing clothes that provided no interesting texture, living in rooms painted in colors so dull they might as well be gray. It was unbearable. Not in a philosophical sense, in a physical, neurological sense. His modified nervous system couldn't process it, couldn't find meaning in it, couldn't justify continued existence if this was all there was. He killed himself 3 weeks into rehabilitation, not out of despair, not as an act of defiance, simply because the alternative, living in a world of such profound sensory deprivation, was not living at all. The Inquisition logged it as a failure of the subject to accept redemption. The Emperor's children, had they known, would have logged it as a success. Because Severus had learned the lesson, had understood the truth, that once you know what it feels like to be truly alive, truly present, truly aware, you can never accept less, even if it kills you, especially if it kills you. Not everyone who joins Chaos stays. The Imperium doesn't talk about this, neither do the Chaos Space Marines, for obvious reasons. But it's true. There are cultists who change their minds, who run, who throw themselves at the Imperium's mercy and beg for redemption. Some are killed immediately, standard protocol. Some are interrogated, thoroughly, then killed. A very few, the ones who have valuable intelligence, who haven't mutated too far, who seem genuinely penitent, are given the opportunity to serve again. This is not mercy. They are sent to penal legions. suicide missions where the expected survival rate is measured in hours. They are tattooed with marks of shame that identify them to any Imperial citizen who sees them. They are forbidden from speaking except when directly questioned. They are functionally slaves. Their lives forfeit, their only purpose to die in service to the emperor they betrayed. Most don't last long. A few do. A very few survive long enough to have their sentences commuted, to be granted something approaching normal citizenship, to live out whatever years remain to them in quiet obscurity. They never talk about their time with chaos. Not because they're forbidden, though they are, but because no one would understand. How do you explain that you left not because chaos was worse than the Imperium, but because it was honest about being worse? That the cruelty was at least transparent, the exploitation at least acknowledged, the suffering at least purposeful? How do you explain that you chose to return to the Imperium not out of faith, not out of loyalty, but simply because you lacked the strength to continue? That chaos asks for everything: your will, your pain, your transformation, your acceptance that you will never be comfortable or safe again, and you just couldn't. They don't explain. They just live, quietly, working whatever jobs they're assigned, following whatever orders they're given, never speaking of the time when they mattered, when their choices had weight, when gods paid attention to their existence. They are broken in a way the Imperium approves of: useful, obedient, silent, empty. The Night Lords do not pretend to care about their cultists. This is refreshing in its own horrible way. Other legions offer purpose or transformation or acknowledgement. The Night Lords offer employment, a transaction. You provide service, scouting, maintenance, manual labor, occasionally your own terrorized screaming when they need to break an enemy's morale. In exchange, they provide protection from everything except themselves. The cultists who join the Night Lords understand this. They're not idealists. They're not seekers. They're survivors. People who've learned that in a universe of predators, your best chance is to attach yourself to the biggest predator and hope it doesn't eat you first. Sometimes it does eat you. The Night Lords are not subtle about this. They will, occasionally, kill and eat their own cultists. Not out of necessity. They have food stores, nutrient paste, all the logistics of any warband. They do it to maintain fear, to keep everyone sharp, to remind the survivors that they are never safe, never secure, never beyond the reach of sudden, arbitrary violence. This is horrifying, but it's also honest. The Imperium will kill you just as arbitrarily, work you to death, send you into a meat grinder war, execute you for failing to meet quota, but it will call it duty. It will dress it up in theology and purpose and the greater good. The Night Lords just call it what it is: violence, pure, purposeless, inevitable. And their cultists accept this because at least they know the rules. Stay useful, stay alert, don't draw attention unless you want to become an example. Die when your number comes up and hope it's quick. It's not much, but it's more than hope, it's certainty. And certainty, even terrible certainty, is easier to live with than false promises. Zul'Kathan stood before the 700 cultists he'd evacuated from Hive Megron. They were in the hold of a word-bearer strike cruiser, in transit to a daemon world where they would be trained, tested, and transformed into something more useful than factory workers with stolen lasguns. Most would not survive the training. He told them this, directly, clearly. "You are no longer what you were," he said. "You cannot go back. The Imperium will not accept you. Your families would not recognize you. You have crossed a threshold that has no return." The cultists listened, some frightened, some eager, most just tired, still processing everything they'd lost and everything they'd gained. "You will suffer here," Zul'Kathan continued. "The training will break you. The mutations will hurt. The gods will test you, and most of you will fail those tests. This is not a promise of salvation. This is not a promise of victory. This is simply a promise that your suffering will have context, that your pain will be seen, that your death, when it comes, will be recorded in the warp itself as an act of will rather than an accident of circumstance." He paused. "Is that enough?" Silence. Long enough that he thought perhaps it wasn't. Perhaps he'd miscalculated. Perhaps these particular cultists wanted more than just acknowledgement. Perhaps, yes. It was Pell who spoke. The young man who'd grown and changed and become something that could tear through flak armor with bare hands, who was still changing, still growing, his body a canvas for forces he didn't understand and couldn't control. "Yes," he said again, "it's enough." The others nodded, one by one, some enthusiastic, some reluctant, all in agreement, because they had lived their entire lives being told they mattered while being treated like they didn't. And the word-bearers had told them they didn't matter except as tools, as resources, as expendable assets in a war that had been burning for 10,000 years, but had treated them like they did, had spoken to them, taught them, acknowledged their existence as something more than production statistics. The honesty was worse than the lie, but it was real, and real was all they'd ever wanted. Hive Megron resumed production 3 months after the purge. The burned levels were sealed, the survivors were redistributed, new workers were shipped in from other districts to fill the vacancies. The manufactorums hummed back to life, assembling las guns for wars they would never see, for soldiers they would never meet, for purposes they would never understand. The ecclesiarchy declared the hive purified. The Guard moved on to the next compliance action. The administratum filed its reports and adjusted its projections, and noted that while productivity had dipped during the incident, it was now within acceptable variance. No one investigated why the uprising had happened. No one asked why 30 factory workers had decided that dying in open rebellion was preferable to living in obedience. No one examined the conditions that had made word-bearers' doctrine appealing. Because the system wasn't designed to ask those questions. It was designed to continue, and it did. On sublevel 47, where Siraven had died, new workers assembled trigger mechanisms. They worked 12-hour shifts. They met their quotas. They died in their 40s of respiratory illness caused by unfiltered air. Some of them, late at night when the overseers weren't watching, found symbols scratched into the walls. Symbols that hadn't been fully burned away. Symbols that seemed to suggest there were alternatives to this existence. Most ignored them. A few didn't. And in the dark spaces between shifts, in the forgotten corners of the Underhive, in the moments of silence when the machinery stopped and you could almost hear yourself think, the whispers began again. You matter. The Imperium is not unaware of the threat posed by chaos cults. Entire organizations exist to combat it. The Inquisition, the Adeptus Astartes, the Ecclesiarchy's internal security divisions. They hunt heretics with the same industrial efficiency the Imperium applies to everything else. They find some, they miss most, because the Imperium is too vast, too complex, too reliant on systems that prioritize function over attention. You cannot monitor 10,000 worlds in detail. You cannot investigate every act of dissent, every whispered doubt, every small failure of faith. You have to prioritize. And the priority is always, does it disrupt production? If a hive world is still meeting its quotas, if the guard regiments are still shipping out on schedule, if the tithes are still being paid, then whatever is happening beneath the surface is by definition not a priority. The Inquisition knows this. They've written countless reports detailing how chaos infiltration exploits the Imperium's own structure, how cults hide in plain sight by remaining productive, how heresy spreads not through dramatic acts of rebellion, but through quiet conversations in the dark. The reports are filed, marked as low priority, shelved, because changing the system would be more disruptive than the cults. This is the truth that no one in the Imperium will speak aloud. They need the machine more than they need the people who operate it. They will tolerate chaos infiltration, to a degree, if the alternative is examining why that infiltration is successful. Because if they examined it, they would have to confront what the cultists already know. The Imperium treats its citizens exactly the same way chaos does, as resources, as tools, as expendable components in a vast and grinding mechanism. The only difference is that chaos is honest about it, and honesty, in the end, is the most dangerous weapon of all. In a cell on Terra, in the dungeons beneath the Inquisitorial Palace, a cultist awaits execution. Her name has been removed from all records. Her crime has been classified. Her existence has been retroactively erased from every document, every ledger, every register where she might have appeared. She will die tomorrow. Not quickly. Not cleanly. The Inquisition has questions, and they will extract every answer they can before they allow her to expire. She knows this, accepts it. She chose this path. She knew where it would lead. But tonight, in the darkness of her cell, she prays, not to the Emperor, not anymore, to powers that answered when she called, to gods that acknowledged her suffering and gave it purpose, to forces that promised nothing except that she would matter, and kept that promise. She speaks the words quietly, the same words millions of cultists speak every night, in secret, in fear, in defiance. I am seen, I am known, I exist. No one hears her, no guard reports it, no servitor records it, no inquisitor bursts in to demand recantation. She is alone in the dark, speaking to powers that may or may not be listening, may or may not care, may or may not remember her name when her soul reaches the warp. It doesn't matter. She spoke, she chose, she mattered. And tomorrow, when they kill her, that will still be true. The Imperium will log her death as the successful termination of a heretic threat. They will learn nothing from it, change nothing because of it, move on to the next case, the next cultist, the next small crack in the vast machine. And in the underhives, in the factory temples, in the forgotten places where people work and die in silence, someone else will find the symbols, someone else will hear the whispers, someone else will ask the question that the Imperium can never answer. If I am sacred, why does nothing sacred ever happen to me? And the cycle will continue, because the Imperium does not learn, it only endures. And endurance is not the same as survival. It's just continuation, function, process, forever. Entry log, Hive Megron Administrative District. Date 127.M42, production status, nominal compliance rating, acceptable. Notes, minor workforce adjustment completed, all quotas met, no further action required. End entry. There are chaos warbands that have cultists who've served for centuries, not because they've been mutated into immortality, not because they've been blessed with unnatural longevity, simply because they've become too useful to allow to die. In the warband of the Black Legion's 7th Company, there is a woman named Kale. She was born on a forge world that fell to chaos 437 years ago. She was 16 when the Black Legion arrived. She is 453 now. She should have died centuries ago. Human bodies are not designed to last that long, even with augmentation. But the Black Legion's sorcerers have kept her alive through a patchwork of warp surgery, mechanical augmentation, and regular infusions of youth stolen from sacrifices. She serves as a logistics coordinator. She knows every supply chain, every resource cache, every hidden depot the 7th Company maintains across a dozen sectors. She speaks 17 languages, including 3 daemon tongues. She can negotiate with corrupted tech priests, renegade merchant captains, and entities that exist only partially in real space. She is invaluable. She is also exhausted. 437 years of service. 437 years of watching other cultists die while she continues. 437 years of being maintained like a critical machine component because the warband cannot afford to lose her institutional knowledge. She has asked 3 times to be allowed to die. Each time the request was denied. Not cruelly, not dismissively. The Chaos Lord who commands the 7th Company sat with her personally, explained that her service was too important, that the warband needed her, that her expertise could not be replaced. I have given you everything, she said the last time. 4 centuries. Is that not enough? It is more than enough, the Chaos Lord agreed. But we need more anyway. That is the nature of war. It does not care about fairness. It does not care about exhaustion. It only cares about function. The Imperium would say the same thing, Kale said quietly. Yes, the Chaos Lord said. The difference is, we acknowledge that this is cruel. We do not pretend it is holy. And when you finally do die, when your body can no longer be maintained, when even our sorcerers cannot keep you functional, you will be remembered. Your name will be spoken in our rituals. Your service will be recorded in the warp itself. The Imperium would simply replace you with a servitor and forget you existed. Kale thought about this. Is that enough? She asked. I don't know, the Chaos Lord said honestly. Is it? She didn't answer, because she didn't know either. But she went back to work, because what else was there? There are children born into chaos cults who never know anything else. They are raised in the hidden temples, taught the catechisms of the ruinous powers alongside basic literacy, trained in combat and ritual with equal emphasis. They know nothing of the Imperium except what their parents tell them, that it is a vast machine that consumes people and calls it holy. They believe this because they have no context for anything else. These children are, in some ways, more dangerous than converts. They have no doubt, no lingering loyalty to the Emperor, no memory of imperial life to tempt them back. They are chaos-born, chaos-raised, chaos-dedicated from their first breath. They are also, in some ways, more tragic, because they never chose. The word-bearers debate this sometimes, in the long years between campaigns. Whether someone who is raised to worship chaos is truly a cultist, or simply a product of their environment. Whether faith that is inherited has the same value as faith that is chosen. The debates are philosophical, academic. They change nothing. The children still serve, still fight, still die when their time comes. But some of the older Dark Apostles, the ones who remember the Imperium before the Horus Heresy, who remember what it was like to have a choice, to make a decision that changed everything. Look at the second-generation cultists with something that might be pity. Not because their lives are harder, because their lives are easier. They never had to break themselves away from the Imperium, never had to overcome decades of indoctrination, never had to risk everything on the slim hope that something better might exist. They were simply born into the truth. And truth without struggle is just doctrine, which makes them, in the end, no different from imperial citizens, just pointed in the opposite direction. Not all cultists are recruited from the desperate underclasses. Some come from the Adeptus Mechanicus. The tech priests of Mars are taught from initiation that the Omnissiah is the machine god, that the Emperor is the Omnissiah made manifest, that technology is sacred and innovation is heresy. But the Mechanicus explores the galaxy. They find things, ancient technologies, xenos artifacts, fragments of the dark age of technology that should not exist, that function in ways that violate every principle of approved imperial science. And some tech priests look at these things and ask, if this is heresy, why does it work? This is the crack through which chaos enters. Not through promises of power, tech priests have power. Not through offers of purpose, they have purpose. But through the simple, irresistible lure of understanding. The Mechanicus worships machines they do not understand. They follow rituals without knowing why those rituals work. They repeat catechisms written 10,000 years ago by people who might have understood, but that understanding has been lost to time and bureaucracy. Chaos offers understanding. The Dark Mechanicum shows them why machines work, shows them the principles underlying the rituals, shows them that technology is not faith-based magic, but comprehensible science, and that science extends into the warp just as surely as it extends into real space. This is intoxicating to a certain kind of mind. The tech priest who becomes a cultist doesn't feel like they've betrayed anything. They feel like they've finally been allowed to practice their craft properly. To understand instead of simply performing rote repetition. They are, of course, wrong. The Dark Mechanicum's understanding comes at a cost. The technologies they create are more effective, yes, but they require fuel the Imperium would never provide: souls, suffering, the slow corruption of reality itself. But by the time the tech priest realizes this, they are already too deep, already too invested, already too changed by what they've learned to ever return to the comfortable ignorance of imperial orthodoxy. They continue, because understanding, even terrible understanding, is better than ignorance. This is what they tell themselves. In the dark places of their augmented minds, where human neurons still fire beneath layers of mechanical enhancement, they wonder if this is true. But they never stop wondering long enough to turn back. In the halls of the Inquisition, in the briefing rooms where reports are compiled and strategies debated, there is a question that is never officially raised. Why is chaos so effective at recruitment? Not the surface answer, that they promise power, that they exploit weakness, that they prey on the desperate. Everyone knows that. The deeper question, why are there so many desperate people to prey upon? The Imperium spans 1,000,000 worlds, quadrillions of human souls, the resources of an entire galaxy, the industrial might of 10,000 years of continuous production. Why, then, are so many of its citizens vulnerable to promises that acknowledge their existence? The Inquisition knows the answer. They simply cannot speak it aloud, because the answer is, the system is designed this way. The Imperium requires a vast underclass of desperate, exhausted, hopeless people because that is what keeps the machine running. Content people ask questions. Comfortable people demand rights. Happy people organize, resist, refuse to work themselves to death for no compensation. The Imperium cannot afford that, so it maintains the pressure, deliberately. The long work hours, the insufficient rations, the brutal overseers, the casual cruelty, the complete absence of hope, these are not accidents. They are features. They keep people too tired to rebel, too hungry to organize, too afraid to speak. And when someone does rebel, when someone does organize, when someone does speak, the Inquisition arrives and classifies it as chaos corruption, which it often is. Because chaos recruits from the same pool of people the Imperium has deliberately brutalized. This is the cycle. The Imperium creates the conditions for desperation. Chaos exploits that desperation. The Imperium responds with violence, creating more desperation, feeding more recruits to chaos. No one in the Inquisition will say this in an official report, but they know. They've always known. And they continue anyway. Because the alternative would be to change the system. And changing the system would disrupt production. And production is the only thing that matters. In the warband of the Wordbearers, there is a ritual performed once every Imperial year. The Dark Apostle stands before the assembled cultists and speaks names. Not the names of the living, the names of the dead. Every cultist who has died in service to the warband in the past year, every name recorded in the litanies, preserved in the scriptures, spoken aloud so that the warp itself might remember. It takes hours, sometimes days, if the year was particularly bloody. The cultists listen, standing in formation, silent except for the ritual responses when prompted. This is not a memorial service. The word-bearers do not mourn. This is an accounting, a ledger read aloud. Proof that every death was recorded, every sacrifice noted, every soul that passed from real space into the warp acknowledged by something greater than bureaucracy. When it is finished, the Dark Apostle asks the same question he asks every year. Is this enough? And every year, the cultists respond, yes. Because they know, all of them know, have been told repeatedly, that this is more than the Imperium ever offered. The Imperium does not speak your name when you die, does not record it in any ledger meant to be read, does not acknowledge your passing except as a reduction in head count, a vacancy to be filled, a minor adjustment in resource allocation. The word-bearers speak your name to gods that probably don't care, in a ritual that probably means nothing, recorded in a warp that will eventually consume your soul regardless of whether your name was spoken or not. But they speak it. And for people who have spent their entire lives being treated as interchangeable components, as nameless functionaries, as population statistics, having your name spoken is everything. In the end, all cultists face the same decision. It comes in different forms, different moments, different circumstances, but the decision is always the same. Continue or surrender. Continue means accepting everything that comes with chaos service. The mutations, the pain, the knowledge that you are a resource being consumed by powers that care nothing for you as an individual. The certainty that you will die, probably badly, probably soon. Surrender means attempting to return to the Imperium, throwing yourself on their mercy, hoping for redemption, rehabilitation, a chance to serve again in some capacity. Most choose to continue. Not because chaos is better, it isn't. Objectively, measurably, the Imperium offers better odds of survival, better conditions, better outcomes for most people most of the time. But the Imperium requires something chaos does not. It requires you to pretend. Pretend you don't see the cruelty. Pretend the suffering is holy. Pretend the system works. Pretend your life matters in the abstract while being treated like it doesn't in the concrete. Chaos requires no pretending. It is exactly what it appears to be. Cruel, exploitative, consuming, but honest about being all of those things. And for people who have spent decades pretending they believe, pretending they don't notice, pretending they're fine when they're dying inside, the relief of not having to pretend anymore is worth almost any price. This is the final lesson. This is what the Imperium cannot understand, and the Chaos Space Marines never need to explain. The truth, even a terrible truth, is preferable to a comforting lie. Because you can build a life on truth. You can make decisions based on reality. You can know where you stand, what you're worth, what to expect. A lie requires constant maintenance, constant vigilance, constant energy spent pretending you believe something you know is false. The Imperium runs on lies, chaos runs on truth, and truth in the end is more sustainable. Even when the truth is, you are going to be consumed and it is going to hurt, and there is nothing beyond except the eternal hunger of the warp. Even then, truth is enough. The Imperium will never acknowledge what this means. They will continue to classify chaos cultists as traitors, heretics, the deceived, and the damned. They will hunt them with the same methodical efficiency they apply to everything else. They will kill them by the millions, burn their temples, purge their worlds, and the cults will continue to grow. Because you cannot kill an idea with fire. You cannot purge a truth with violence. You cannot suppress a realization with force. The realization is simple. The Imperium treats you exactly the way chaos does, but lies about it. Once someone understands this, truly understands it, deep in the part of their mind that cannot be propagandized or indoctrinated or threatened into submission, they are lost to the Imperium. Not because chaos is appealing, because the Imperium has become intolerable. This is what 10,000 years of grinding oppression creates. Not loyalty, not faith, not dedication, exhaustion. And from exhaustion comes the question, why am I pretending this is holy? The Imperium has no answer to that question. Chaos does. The answer is, you don't have to. 3 words, simple, devastating. You don't have to. You don't have to pretend the suffering is meaningful. You don't have to believe the cruelty is necessary. You don't have to accept that your life is worthless while being told it is sacred. You can stop pretending. You can acknowledge what you've always known. You can speak the truth, even if it damns you. This is the promise chaos actually offers. Not power, not transformation, not victory, permission. Permission to stop lying to yourself. Permission to see the Imperium as it actually is. Permission to choose, with full knowledge of the consequences, whether to continue serving or to burn it all down. Most people never take that permission. They live and die in service, never quite believing, but never quite admitting they don't believe, maintaining the comfortable fiction that their suffering serves some greater purpose. But some do. Some take the permission, some stop pretending. And those are the ones who become cultists. Not because they were deceived, because they were finally honest. On Hive Megron, in the depths of sub-level 47, a young worker named Terrace found strange symbols carved into the wall of his assembly station. He was 19. He'd been working the Manufactorum for 3 years. He had 43 years left to live, if he was lucky, if the respiratory illness didn't get him sooner. He stared at the symbols. They hurt to look at, made his eyes water, made something in the back of his mind whisper that this was important, that this meant something, that someone had been here before him and tried to leave a message. He should have reported it, should have called the overseers, let them sandblast the wall clean, gone back to his quota. He didn't. Instead, he traced the symbols with his finger, felt the grooves worn into the metal, wondered who had made them, wondered what they had been thinking, wondered if they had felt the same way he felt, that this couldn't be all there was, that there had to be something more than assembly and sleep and eventual death. Behind him, the shift supervisor called out a warning, quota deficit, speed up, Emperor watches. Terrace picked up his tools, went back to work. But that night, alone in his habitation unit, he drew the symbols from memory on a scrap of paper. And he wondered. And in the dark spaces between shifts, in the moments of silence when the machinery stopped, in the deep places of the hive where the Imperium's reach was thin and uncertain, something vast and patient noticed his wondering, and began, very gently, to answer. Entry log, Hive Megron Administrative District. Date 167.M42, production status, nominal compliance rating, acceptable. Notes, all quotas met, workforce stable, no anomalies detected. The Emperor protects.